Hello and welcome to our button placement tutorial. I'm Jessel Brizan, and today we're going to explore a couple of methods for placing and positioning buttons on your flat sketches. As you can see, we have a basic shirt flat sketch, and typically with shirts you see there are 7 buttons along the front placket. I'm going to zoom in on the color, and you see we already have a button on the color stand. The first method we're going to explore is the transform again method. So using the selection tool, I'm going to select this button and I'm going to duplicate it downwards using Shift and Alt, right, to create the second button. I'm going to go to Object, Transform, Transform again. If you notice, the keyboard shortcut is Control and D. So we're going to select this option, and simply what Transform again does, it repeats our last command. And what you will notice is that all 3 buttons are equidistant. Okay, so we have 3 buttons. We need 4 more to create the 7 button front placket. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and I'm going to scroll down so you can see the movement. Instead of going to the object menu, I'm going to press Ctrl and D 4 more times. So now we have 4, 5, 6, 7 buttons. So I'm going to zoom out, and there you can see we have 7 buttons along our front placket. Now, as an additional tip, if you want to adjust the last button, alright, so if you notice it might be a bit high, it might be too low, simply select that button. We already have it selected, and you could use the arrow key. I'm going to nudge mine downwards, okay, and position it just about the same level with the end of the dots. Okay, now by doing this, you'll notice I have thrown off the spacing of the buttons. Using the selection tool, I'm going to select all of the buttons, and I'm going to go to the Align palette, and under Distribute Spacing, I'm going to select this button, which is Vertical Distribute Space. By clicking that button, it now realigns all the buttons, or what I should say, it distributes evenly the spacing between the buttons. Okay, so as an additional tip, sometimes you will see with some shirt designs that the distance between the first and the second button might be shorter than the distance between the remaining buttons. So using the Shift key, I'm going to select the second button, and I'm going to nudge this second button upward so that it is closer to the first button. Again, you'll see this throws off the spacing with the rest of the buttons. So with the selection tool, I'm going to select buttons 2 through 7. I'm going to go back to Align, click Vertical Distribute Space. So now you see, again, it distributes evenly the spacing between the remaining buttons. Okay, so again, the spacing between the first and second buttons is shorter than the spacing between the rest of the buttons. Sometimes you might see some shirt designs might have 8 buttons along the front placket. If you want to add another button, you could simply duplicate any of these buttons. Again, the spacing is thrown off, so I'm going to select buttons 2 through to the last button. Again, we're going to select Vertical Distribute Space. So now you'll see again the spacing is distributed evenly along the front placket. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the first method, which is the transform again method. Next, we're going to explore the second method, which is the blend method. Okay, so I'm going to delete those buttons. Alright, we're going to remain with the button that is on the color. Again, using the selection tool, I'm going to select this button, and I'm going to distribute it all the way down to the hem, which is going to, this is going to represent our last button. I'm going to shift click and select the top button, and next we're going to go to Object, Blend, Blend Options. In the Blend Options dialog box, we see we have a few options. Where it says spacing, we want specified steps. As you can see on my screen, there are a few other options, but we want specified steps. Again, if we are creating a shirt with 7 buttons along the front placket, right, we need to specify how many steps, or that will actually dictate the number of steps. We already have 2 buttons, we need 5 more buttons. So in this box, we're going to type 5. Again, we're going to accept the default orientation, which is Align to Page, and you're going to click OK. Next, we're going to go back to Object, Blend again, and this time we're going to select make. If you notice, the keyboard shortcut is Alt, Control and B. We're going to select that option, and now we've added the 5 buttons in between. I must point out that the only vector objects here are the first and last buttons. The 5 added buttons are an effect. Right? It's simply an effect, so those are not vector objects. Just as before, if we were creating or designing a shirt that had 8 buttons along the front placket, this is a simple technique, right, for adding. The blend is a very simple technique in terms of adding additional or subtracting buttons from the front placket. All you need to do is, with the blend selected, you go to Object, Blend, you go back to Blend Options, right? So we have 5 buttons in between, or we added 5 buttons in between. We need to change that to 6, because remember, the first and last buttons are our original 2 buttons. So I'm going to change this to 6. We're going to click OK, and what you'll see, we have now added an additional button. So now we have 8. Again, what the blend option does, it automatically distributes evenly the spacing between the buttons. Now, as we did with the previous method, which is the transform again method, sometimes the spacing between the first and the second button is shorter than the distance between the second button and the rest of the other buttons. Okay, so I'm going to show you a simple way in terms of how you could achieve that. So firstly, we're going to release the blend that we have created. So you go to Object, Blend, Release, and you see our blend effect has now disappeared, and what we remain with is the 2 original vector buttons. Now let me point out something here, that when Illustrator creates a blend effect, when you release that blend, it creates a path, right, in which the buttons, or which the blend effect, right, flows along. So what you're going to need to do with your selection tool, just select that path, you're going to delete it. So now we have our 2 vector buttons. What I'm going to do is, with the selection tool, select the top button, and I'm going to duplicate that down a short distance. So now we have the second button from the top. Using the Shift key, we're going to shift click the last button, and now we're going to apply the blend again. So you're going to go to Object, Blend, Blend Options. We have 3 buttons. Again, if we are creating a 7 button front placket, we just need to add 4 more buttons. So again, we're going to add in here, or type in here, 4. You're going to click OK, and now you're going to go back to Object, Blend, select Make, and now it's added the 4 buttons in between. So now we have our 7 button front placket. Again, you'll notice that the buttons 2 to 7 are equidistant, and the distance between the first and second button is shorter than the distance between the remaining buttons. So this is what we wanted to achieve. Now, sometimes you may need to expand or change the blend effect into actual vector objects. Probably you might want to add color, you might want to change the weight of the strokes, whatever your need or desire is. I'm going to demonstrate a way that you could get around that. So if you ever need to get around or change the blend to vector objects, all you simply do is you go to the Object menu and you go to Expand. In the Expand dialog box, you'll see you have a few options. You could check all of them: Object, Fill, and Stroke. Click OK, and simply it's going to convert the blend to vector objects. So now all of these buttons, they're grouped, right? If you right click, you can ungroup that. So these are now all individual buttons. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the second method, which is the blend method. So again, the 2 methods are, the first one we explored was the transform again method, and the second one was the blend method. So this brings us to the end of our tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that it helps you in your design process. If you like our content, I invite you to subscribe, like, share, and donate to our channel. Please feel free to leave a comment or suggest any tutorials you would like to see in the future. So thank you for watching, and until next time, peace and blessings.